Good morning. Today our guest is Professor Robert Weissberg. Hello, Robert. How are you doing?
How are you? I'm doing fine. It's a beautiful day here in New York City.
I'm doing great, Robert. It's a pleasure to have a guest like yourself, a man known for his academic pieces. I looked at your Google Scholar report. You're highly published, but you're also known for controversy. But the point, Robert, is that we live in a very sensitive age. So what most people deem to be controversial is not really that controversial. But
Mhm.
we're going to hit the ground running by talking about some of your pieces for Chronicles magazine. And one piece in particular is quite illuminating, I must say. The Taliban may have provided a Sputnik moment for wokeness. What is this article about, Rob?
Well, for years, the United States, basically from the mid 60s onward, has been practicing our version of domestic nation building. We've been trying to create whole new nations in places like Newark, Detroit, Baltimore, East St. Louis, places like that. And we keep pouring money in, we keep trying, and we don't succeed. But now we have a very, very clear picture of what failed nation building is like. Afghanistan, nothing worked. All the money put into changing the schools, building highways, and all that sort of stuff did not produce a new people. And my hope is that eventually somebody would say, look, there are lessons to be drawn from Afghanistan. You cannot change these people. And hopefully that'll allow us. We've known that lesson for a long time. The news is not new, but it provides a way of talking about a failure. We can start talking about Newark and Detroit, not by discussing Newark and Detroit first, but by first coming up and discussing Afghanistan and then sliding over to the other issues. It's a gateway to a far more difficult discussion.
Exactly my point, Robert. So, in at mainstream academic circles, there's a new argument, and the argument is like this: Oh, Islam is not a religion of violence. The Quran promotes peace, and I'm not doing this to smear Muslims, but the truth is this: during the 9th and 8th centuries, the religion was radicalized, and Islam is terrorists today. They're subscribing to this religion, to this ideology that became prominent in the 8th and 9th century. So even if you do argue that Islam is not a religion of violence, the reality is that terrorists take an archaic philosophy seriously. So
There's always an
basically,
excuse. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
exactly. You get what I'm saying.
we tried. I can rattle off all the failures of nation building without even touching on Islam. For
Yes.
example, the Aborigines in Australia, the Gypsies in Europe, the people in the north of Finland and Sweden, the so-called
Army people.
Sami people, the American Indians. There's a long list of these things. The Afghan situation is it's not unique. It's only the most recent installment of a long line of failures. But the advantage of it, it's in our face thanks to television. We can look at it and say, we have failed. And everybody knows we have failed. This is quite different than talking about the failure with the American Indians or failing with the Australian Aborigines. That's very, very distant kind of stuff. We need something that we can sink our teeth in the here and now and point to and say, look, you cannot change people into Iowa farmers growing soybeans when they rather grow poppies.
Yeah, and Robert, what you're referring to is the long determinants of personality. IQ is important, but personality traits are also extremely important. IQ can get you the job, but personality traits determine your level of success. And based on actual data, and studies that have been compiled by many leading scholars, personality variations do exist. So, for example, people in the West are more patient, they're more likely to delay gratification, they're open to ideas, and they're more extroverted, and they're also more individualistic. And most of these variables are positively associated with wealth.
Right. The easiest way of doing this, and I've done this many times, and this is a safe way of doing this, is to talk about dogs. Everybody knows about dogs, okay? And if you have any experience with dogs, you know about breeds of dogs. You know, poodles are different than Rottweilers. Have you ever owned a terrier?
If I've
You
ever
own a
heard of
dog,
what?
a terrier. You ever
No, no,
have
not an.
you
I'm
own
not
a
an
dog?
animal person. No, no dogs.
No dogs. Okay. But if you own a dog, you know that different breeds have different characteristics, and breeders work on these characteristics to change them. An article I wrote many years ago talks about converting American university students into dachshunds. Dachshunds were originally bred as killer dogs to go after a weasel. It's in Europe, not in the United States. It's called the dachs. They are vicious, vicious dogs, killer dogs. That's what they were bred for. But people in the United States found them cute and adorable wiener dogs. So the breeders bred out the nasty characteristics out of dachshunds. In other words, the nasty, vicious dachshunds were not allowed to breed. Docile, playful dachshunds were bred. And so after a couple hundred generations, I'm not quite sure how many, you got these little cute little wiener dogs. And you can breed people just like you can breed dogs. And every dog owner knows the difference. You don't buy certain dogs because of their behavior. They bite. Others are very passive and lie around the house. And when you talk about this, everybody shakes their head and says, yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right. I know. I had an Irish setter one time. Stupidest dog you can possibly imagine. I got a poodle now, a brilliant, smart dog. But what about people?
What about people? Yes. Well, Robert, I like that you're politically incorrect, and this you're the star today. I'm just a random guy who's interviewing bright people with doctorates and many books. But Robert, the dog breed hypothesis, some people argue that it should not be applied to the concept of race. There are many arguments for and against it. I won't get into today, but what you're saying is quite logical. We belong to the human species, but there are racial differences in intelligence and personality and outlook. That's not a big deal. No, even in the ancient world, some argue that the climate had an impact on personality. And today we have really good data purporting these assertions to be true.
Well, look, you can take people who have ancestors have grown up in a northern climate. Take a bunch of Scandinavians and move them to equatorial Africa, where the climate is very, very different. Do you think the Scandinavians are going to change overnight because they're in a different climate?
No, Robert, on this show I cite data, but sometimes it's boring because there you already know a lot. So I don't like to repeat myself. But again, we have good studies saying that the country of ancestry can predict personality. So people from individualistic countries, when they migrate to the states, they are employed in individualistic jobs that allow them to be independent. The
Mhm.
the region of ancestry can also predict fertility. So these issues are only controversial because we're living in an age of mediocrity.
Well, good. Take South Africa. The Dutch settlers in South Africa were there. I'm not quite sure exactly when they arrived, but I would say at least 400 years ago. The Boers, right? They
Yes.
were sturdy, hard scrapple farmers, very successful farmers, I should add. They're still there, and they still are different than native population. The Boers have been in Africa as long as the English have been in America. And the people who are of English ancestry in the United States are just as different as the American Indians when they came to America 300, 400 years ago. These traits do not dissipate easily. Now, over time, you can change them. In other words, is that people can, like you change dachshunds, you can change. A good example of that is height. The Dutch are people who've gotten taller. And they've studied this and they say, well, how did the Dutch get taller? Well, it seems to be the case that tall Dutch men married tall Dutch women and they had tall children. And these children, in fact, married taller people. And eventually, height in Holland went up. You can change people by selective breeding. But that doesn't mean that if they go to a different climate, they change overnight. It has to be some kind of purposeful behavior to bring about that change. Now, that change may be hurting the people. I mean, you can imagine a situation where people have children with people who have disabilities of one type or another, say rare blood diseases that are toxic. And eventually what happens is the entire population will die off from these diseases. It goes all different ways. It's not every evolutionary change is not necessarily an improvement, but changes do occur.
I'm happy that you're discussing the Dutch because we have new evidence suggesting that the population is actually getting shorter.
That's because of immigration into Holland. Holland, having a former empire, like so many countries that had an empire, has welcomed in people from Indonesia. Now, Indonesian people, my experience, I've seen a fair number of Indonesian people, are not very tall.
Yes, and the study was published by, well, not published by CNN, reported by CNN, and the researchers actually attributed some of the variants to immigration, but they were a bit skeptical. I guess they're politically correct.
Look, one can make the argument that the United States is going to develop an ability to speak Spanish in recent years. Why? More Spanish people are coming to the United States. If you do a survey, what languages do you speak? You'll find today more people speak Spanish in the United States than did in 1950. So someone would say, you see, populations change. Americans are becoming more comfortable with Spanish. No, my dear, they're not becoming more comfortable. More people comfortable with Spanish are coming to the United States. I mean, we can play all kinds of linguistic games, and people in the academy, take my word for it, are excellent at being sophists in this regard.
Robert, I'm happy that you're informing us that it can take years or maybe even centuries to change culture. And I'm saying this to speak briefly about African Americans.
Yep.
Robert, let's be realistic. I'm black, but that's an irrelevant point. I'm driven by data.
Mhm.
IQ disparities are consistent. The black-white IQ gap is one of the most consistent findings in psychological research. Robert, there are many studies explaining why some Jewish groups on average are more intelligent. There are also studies explaining that East Asians have alleles with higher frequencies for intelligence. Even the great Arthur Jensen, who was closer to genetics, argued that intelligence is impacted by genes and culture. So we do know that the gap is genetic, but culturally, there's also a big problem. African Americans have been resident in the States for years, but they're not assimilating. I'm not sorry, but I don't get the impression that they're assimilating. There's no evidence to suggest that Black Americans are able to play the game. None. Some of them can, but most of them do not. What's going on, Robert? You're a smart guy.
Well, part of it is breeding behavior. Now, I have seen bits and pieces of data, I'm sure you have if you read Steve Saylor, suggesting that the fertility rate among highly educated Black women is extremely low. Now, we know that the higher the education, the fewer the children. That's a general phenomenon. But it seems to be particularly common among smart Black women. They're having very, very few children. The data, the actual numbers vary, but that's the overall pattern. Now, let me give you at least the one version of the opposite among Jews. By the way, Arthur Jensen, had a Jewish mother, so that technically makes him Jewish, even though his father was Danish. But in any case, one of the theories about smart Jews is that the marriage pattern there was the reverse, that the daughters of the wealthiest people in the village, which tended to be of higher IQ, married the smartest kid in the school, the yeshiva. And they had children who were smart, and they married smart children. Meanwhile, the children who were not very smart at all simply didn't get married and didn't have any children themselves. So it's the parallel with the dachshunds. If you keep breeding for docility and size among dachshunds, you'll get small little wiener dogs. On the other hand, if you breed for size and viciousness, you'll get tougher dogs. Now, the thing about breeding in the United States is that at least in the modern time, it's all voluntary. I don't know if you're married or plan to get married,
I'm
but
not married.
eventually, what?
I'm not married.
You're not married. But eventually, let's suppose you decide you want to get married. And so
A
you go into
smart
the
one.
marketplace and
A
you look around and you say, what do I want in the marketplace?
smart
And you can
one.
want anything, a girl who has a rich parent, a girl who's gorgeous, a girl with a big smart brain. Who knows, right? But anyhow, you make choices, and people make choices, and populations shift. Populations get bigger. People marry taller people; they get bigger. They marry better people. Uh, I live in a building here in New York City, which is an upscale building, and a lot of the people in this building work. I live near the financial district, and a lot of the people in this building work in the financial district, and they have money. And you could see looking around how I'm not being sexist here, I'm being totally objective. The young women in this building, by and large, are very, very good looking. They're all fit, trim, they all dress well, they're beautifully attired, they have clear skin, they don't have tattoos, they're good looking people. Why? Because people with lots of money select on these characteristics. And so eventually what will happen is you have a whole population of good looking people. You go to restaurants that people are very wealthy, they're all good looking. Very, very few extremely obese people. It's all breeding. It's all voluntary. No government is forcing people to breed.
Robert, I'm laughing because you're correct. You're 1,000,000% correct. I actually have an article on the topic of dysgenics in the Black community, and I will send you an email.
Okay.
I will not share the name of the publication that ran it because of YouTube policies. But in my article, I basically contend that highly educated Black women are less likely to have children, and Black women are also less likely to engage in assortative mating. So even if Black women have children, the father could be a dumb man. He's not necessarily brilliant. Black women are less likely to marry to highly successful men when they do marry. And Black women are also hesitant to marry outside of their race. So if Black women really want to form long-standing families, maybe these professional women should marry white or Asian men. But then again, relationships between Asian men and Black women are not stable. The most stable relationships are between Black women and white men. But
Yeah.
if Black women want to marry to procreate, maybe they should date outside of their race. But many of them are not doing so. And the women who do get pregnant, usually they're dating a man who is below them intellectually.
Right. By the way, an interesting phenomenon that I've seen touched on but not developed is that increasingly smart Black women are joining the military. And it's a very good deal for a variety of reasons. That's good training. They get a good pension, but a side benefit for some at least is they meet quality, smart Black men. The military insists upon it. I mean, if you're a troubled individual with a long criminal record, a dope addiction, stupid, you're not going to get into the military. So if I were a Black woman of, say, above average intelligence, and I wanted to find a smart Black man, where would I go?
The military.
The military. And not only that, but you go into the military, I think it's still the case, you spend 20 years there, you get out, and by the time you've been there for 20 years, probably you've encountered a fair number of capable, smart Black men, and you get married. Now, the problem is that you're probably past child rearing age.
Mhm.
You're
And there's another
probably
there's
in
another
your
big
early
problem.
40s.
Yeah, there's another big problem, Robert. Highly educated Black men like to marry Asian women and white women. Yeah, that's
Well,
yes.
usually the what you usually find, okay, is that the Black, and this is really, people have lost their job over this, but I don't have to worry, I don't have a job, I'm unemployed. Uh, Black women, for the most part, are not deemed the most attractive women on surveys. I've seen data, hard data on
Me
this.
too.
Yeah, if you ask men rate women. White men will, generally speaking, rate Asian women the most attractive and Black women the least attractive. Now, one possibility of this, I'm not a biologist, I don't know, I'm just passing on information. It has to do with testosterone. Asian women have lower levels of testosterone. That makes them more feminine. They also make more docile, agreeable wives. Although I've been told by friends of mine that behind the veneer of docile femininity is stainless steel toughness. Uh, these are the tiger moms of the world. John Derbyshire, I don't know if you know John or not.
Yes, I interviewed him.
Yeah. His wife, Rosie, is Chinese. And John refers to her as the boss. And so what happens is, but a lot of white men find Asian women quite agreeable, people like Mark Zuckerberg and others. On the other hand, Black women are not considered attractive, partly because they are so aggressive. I've even heard interviews of top Black athletes, stars in football and basketball, who have white wives. And they ask them sometimes the awkward question, why are you married to a white woman? And the answer I can recall from one such interview was Black women are just too hard in the sense of being difficult to deal with. They're aggressive, they're loud, they're boisterous. White women, and Asian women in particular, are more docile. And I think even in this day of women's lib, most men like more docile women as wives.
Exactly. Remember, Robert, if you are heterosexual, you are attracted to beautiful women. Men like intelligent women, but usually we don't like them when they're too aggressive. If you're a real man, you want an attractive woman who's able to give birth and invest in your children. You don't want a woman who's masculine. If you wanted masculine, well, if you are interested in masculinity, you'd be dating men.
Right.
Yeah, and
Right.
another issue again, Robert, is that Peter Frost argues that maybe we like lighter women because this is a function of sexual selection. In all human populations and even in the animal kingdom, women are lighter than men, and this is
Steve
for
Taylor has made this point on several occasions in movies that certain actresses get roles because they are the lightest person on the set.
Yes, and women need light skin for biological purposes. It makes it easier for them to deal with the physiological effects of pregnancy and lactation and absorb certain vitamins. So it could be a biological issue. But Robert, I'm going to share this interesting study titled Married Black Men's Opinions as to Why Black Women Are Disproportionately Single, a qualitative study. And I'm reading it on the website of NCBI, and the writers, they sound like women. These are feminine names. But the essence of the article is that Black men also believe that Black women are masculine and disrespectful. And this is one.
Yeah, the interesting thing, again, this is way beyond my expertise, okay? But that testosterone, high levels of testosterone shows up in facial structures, that they have more prominent jaws, more muscles in their face. And this gets into the standards of beauty. Smooth, feminine faces are not faces that you would associate with high levels of testosterone. And it's no accident that some of the Black singers and entertainers who are very, very popular look more white. This is an issue that is not talked about openly, but they look white. They have smoother faces. They have less prominent jaws. They're whiter looking. They're probably genetically, I don't know, 30%, 40% white. The 100% Black woman is not a beauty standard in the United States. And I believe, speculative here, because it's not my area of expertise, it may have to do with very, very high levels of testosterone that shape muscles and bones.
Exactly. And another issue again, Robert, is that men prefer skinny women, and NCBI also did a study. The data cited was from 2005. So maybe since then, the Black women are not as obese as they were, but at that time,
No. The Steve Saylor had some recent article in I read it on uh, Ron Unz's site saying that the average black woman is 20 pounds heavier than the average white woman at the same level, same height. Now, one of the commentators said that he had seen the figure of 16 pounds. But even if you take the lower figure on the average woman is what, 5'5", 5'4", 16 pounds is a noticeable difference.
yes, and men don't like fat women, Robert.
Well, some do, some do. I
Yes,
mean,
but most of us do
yeah,
not.
you look at pinup pictures from the late 19th century. Many of the women were quite chubby.
Yeah, but for the average, fat women are not really desirable. They're desirable in some parts of Africa, but Robert, as I said, on this show you can be free. The truth is that most of us men, we don't want someone who's obese.
Well, not only don't we want somebody who's obese, okay, but the law. But if you're on the dating scene, okay, and we were all, I don't know about your personal life, but at one point when I was younger, I would date women, and you would meet women who were overweight, and your instinctive reaction would be that if she's 20 pounds overweight today, she's probably going to be 40 pounds overweight in a few years, and then maybe 60 and 80 pounds. In other words, the present overweightness is a harbinger of things to come, and that's not good. Moreover, somebody who is overweight probably lacks self-control. Do you really want to be married to somebody who lacks self-control? It's extremely costly to live with a person like that. No telling what kind of stuff they will buy and bring home, right?
Yes, and self-control also predicts intelligence and many other positive variables.
Absolutely.
And there are also racial differences in self-control.
Right. It all goes together. And the today it's also a health problem. We do know that obesity is related to a lot of poor health outcomes, including COVID-19, but also, things like heart disease and hypertension and things like that. In today's world, when you marry somebody, you also inherit the possibility of dealing with people who have health problems. And take my word for it. I've seen enough being how old I am. You don't want to be married with somebody who has chronic health problems.
No, not at all. It can affect personal relationships, the sexual life of the couple, and other variables. And it's also expensive.
Well, try getting insurance if you have people with chronic health problems. Moreover, it limits what you can do. I mean, I recently came back. We were on a cruise ship, and I came back, and the cruise ships tend to attract older people, and you could see on the ship people who had aged into considerable obesity, and we're talking serious obesity, and their mobility was limited. So they couldn't go places without all kinds of extra assistance. They couldn't climb stairs. Many of them probably couldn't even get on a bus because the getting on the bus was too arduous. And who wants to have somebody like that as a spouse, male or female?
And Robert, I've often said, when you're in your 60s and 70s, you can accommodate health challenges and maybe obesity. But as a 20 or 30 or 40-year-old, what are you doing with the baggage?
Yeah, it limits the activities you can go to. In today's world, for example, a lot of younger people prefer an active, what they call active lifestyle. They go running, they play sports, they go scuba diving, they go on vacations where they climb mountains, things like that. If you have somebody who's obese, who's seriously obese, you can't do those things, okay? Moreover, there's a social stigma. Let's face it, guys like arm candy, right?
Yes, of course.
When you walk into a room and you have arm candy, everybody looks at you and says, there's a smart guy, there's a lucky guy. You walk into a room and the person on your arm is 40 pounds overweight. It looks awful. You're losing status.
Of course. Yeah, it's just a reality, Robert. We like beautiful people. No, this is a funny topic, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on. So we're going to move on a bit and discuss the Smithsonian. So some months ago, the Smithsonian published that stupid chart conflating values that are predominantly Western with white supremacy. So, for example, individualism is pervasive in the West. You may consult Ari Trendis and Gerd Ofsted, I believe that this is his last name. For delayed gratification, you can read Enrich's new book, Weird. For rationality, you can read Stephen Kalberg. And that we said earlier, impersonal trust is also a feature of the West. The
Right.
concept of a theoretical culture emerged in Western society. Can non-Western peoples exhibit these functions? Of course they can. The justice today in many parts of the world is impartial, but the concept of impartial justice actually emerged in the West. But
Right.
Robert, this is where I begin to agree with the Smithsonian. Hard work and the nuclear family do not represent white supremacy, but the nuclear family is also one of the main features of the West, and you can consult Alan McFarlane. Well, not you, but our listeners, they can read Alan McFarlane and Peter Laslett. The nuclear
Mhm.
family has been has been crucial to the development of the West. No, the Smithsonian. I do have a problem with saying that these features reflect white supremacy, but at the same time, the Smithsonian is not really wrong. Most people are not like Westerners, and it is unfair to impose Western standards on non-Western peoples.
This whole discussion is colossally irrelevant and a waste of time. I don't know why people bring it up. It's like coming up and saying, "Look, let's get back to dogs. It's easy to talk about dogs.
Yeah,
Nobody gets upset. Anybody who's owned a lot of dogs, and I probably owned maybe a dozen dogs over my lifetime, will tell you that they all have various traits. And if you want a dog that is a very good guard dog and loyal to you, you go out and you buy a Rottweiler. If you like a dog that is very intelligent, quick to pick up on training, you buy a poodle. You don't buy a Rottweiler and try to turn it into a poodle. People are different. Let them be different. The
exactly.
world is big enough. The world is plenty big. If you want to have people living in worlds where they gratify their instincts right away, fine. Let them go to a place where they gratify their instincts. One of the great virtues of the United States was that the United States historically was such a big place that people could go to all kinds of distant corners and they could live as they wanted to live. Now, I lived for about 15 years in a small town in Illinois that was dry. You couldn't buy liquor in this town. Nobody knows why this happened, but years ago they voted the town dry. So if you wanted to buy a bottle of booze, you got in your car, you drove about 4 or 5 miles to a store on the edge of town that sold booze, you brought the booze back. There are towns where everything goes. That's why Colorado and Nevada split. Nevada was a wild place. I won't tell you, you're a young man, what was going on there, but all kinds of wild things were going on. And people in Colorado didn't like this sort of thing. So, if you want to go to a place where you can do all sorts of things, go to the county outside Las Vegas. Prostitution is legal. You can gamble in Las Vegas, but you can't gamble in every city or go to hookers legally, at least. My feeling is let people live the lives they want to live. Nobody has to wake up in the morning and rush to work. Nobody has to get up in the morning and say, you know what, I hate my wife, but I'm going to stick with her. Do whatever you want, but do it in a way that doesn't harm anybody else. That's my view on it. And so arguing about characteristics being white or black is really a
Yeah,
waste of time.
exactly. And Robert, do you know why I agree with you? And I don't know if you're still going to agree with me. Some traits make people rich, other traits make people poor. And if some groups are poor because of cultural traits and they refuse to change, so what?
Right, that's exactly
No,
my point.
exactly.
Right,
So
if you want to
what?
sit on the park bench all the time and drink wine and smoke a joint, uh, be my guest, but just don't inflict your bad habits in my neighborhood. Moreover, I am not going to go to your neighborhood and harass you for being welfare cheat and having too many children out of wedlock. Each
That's,
to their own.
exactly. That's not my business. So, for example, the concept of a clock culture is also Western. Carlos Cipolla got that right. And let me read a snippet from a blog online. And the writer was quoting the New York Times. The New York Times reports on one anti-racist seminar where the instructor expounded that white culture is obsessed with mechanical time, clock time, and punishes students for lateness. So being on time is no white. Robert, I value time. If I tell someone we're going to meet at 9 by 8:50, I want them to be ready. And when you value time, people will take you seriously. If some groups do not value time and they appreciate
CPT?
Yes?
You know what CPT is, don't you?
See, what that's an acronym for what? Remind me.
CPT.
Or it's a CPT. No, you can go ahead and explain it.
CPT, colored people's time.
Oh, okay. Oh, colored people's time. Yeah. Okay. Yes. So, Robert, apparently this man, I believe he's black, he appreciates the concept of CPT. And if some black people are unwilling to adjust to the Western notion of a clock time, so what? If they become poorer, so what?
Right.
Don't force them to value time.
Well, my feeling is that we all of us are willing to accept costs. Okay, I pride myself on being punctual. I joke when somebody says that the dinner party begins at 7 o'clock. I may show up, 7:01, and I will say I'm fashionably late according to my standards. Okay. By the way, this is not necessarily a black-white thing.
No.
People who have gone to, I know somebody who told me about going to parties organized by Iranians. Okay. Now, Iran, the word Iran comes from Aryan. And they said 7 o'clock, they would show up at 7 o'clock. Nobody was there. In fact, not only was nobody there, but nobody had even started cooking the food or setting the table. Everybody understood when they said 7 o'clock, they really meant about 9:30. So around the world, there are different standards for time. And it's just a question of what you're comfortable with. I like people to arrive absolutely promptly. When the train says 7:01, it'll pull into the station at 7:01, leave at 7:02. But that's a personal preference. So I go to places where that's the norm. I go to Switzerland from time to time. I like Switzerland. Everything's on time. But people don't, so they don't go to Switzerland.
Time is money is a Western concept popularized by Benjamin Franklin. Robert,
Yeah.
at
Time
the
is
end,
money.
yes, Robert, at the end of the day, do not, and I'm irritated, do not complain about the wealth gap when we know that cultural views differ. Do not just accept that some people, because of culture and other variables, will not be as successful, and neither will.
Let me put it this way to you. It's very easy to simplify this. What do you mean by wealth? Now, for some people, wealth is cash bank money. They look at their accounts and they say, I have $7.5 million. I'm wealthy. Others measure wealth in less tangible things. I have lots of good friends. I have 5 girlfriends. I have 15 children. I live a life of great luxury in my poor neighborhood. I get up whenever I want to get up, and I wear whatever is. I am rich in the intangible things. Now, once you broaden out the definition of what makes you wealthy, it changes everything. I mean, you remember there are wonderful English literature is filled with stories of wealthy people who are very unhappy. When I was growing up, I learned you're too young to remember Scrooge McDuck.
We know Scrooge.
You know Scrooge McDuck?
Yeah, we know Scrooge.
Uncle Scrooge was the character in Christmas Carol. But Scrooge McDuck was a cartoon character. He was the uncle of Donald Duck, and Donald and Daisy Duck had a very, very rich uncle named Scrooge McDuck. And his great passion in life, he had a rowboat and he had a pool full of money. And all he would do would row around this pool of money. Now, a lot of people would say, that's a pretty empty life.
But his values are different. Values can be subjective.
Of course, that's the whole point. You try to maximize what gives you pleasure. Some people, sit around looking at their bank statements all day, or they have a pile of Krugerrands and they run their fingers through that. Others enjoy life, and they live a life which many people who have the big bank accounts would say is dissolute. But in many ways, each envies the other without understanding different definitions of what wealth is.
Yeah, so for example, more than likely you're familiar with Elijah Anderson and maybe you have read his work, but I've read Elijah Anderson and he's actually critical of some aspects of Black culture, but some,
Yeah,
and we're mentioning Black people because Americans, for whatever reason, like the Americans like to compare Blacks to white, right? Blacks to
yeah.
white people. I don't know why, but some Black people in the ghetto are quite okay with ghetto culture. They like to bling, they like to party, and they don't complain that they're poor.
Exactly. And there's no intrinsic definition of what a problem is. And I think what has happened is, and I'll be very blunt about this, there are those people who want to make blacks into whites. Okay. Now, if you reverse it and said, what if blacks announced one day that it's the whites who have the problem? They don't know how to enjoy life. I'm going to have to lighten them up. Okay. Or in some cases, culturally, maybe say darken them. Let's take them out someplace where they could enjoy themselves as Black people do and not worry about things like making a lot of noise or having children with 6 or 7 different women and all those wonderful things. And I'm sure we'll have programs, mentors, role models, government-sponsored programs to make whites more into Blacks. Now, whites would be outraged by that, right?
Yes.
Of course, I would be too, right? But this is exactly what we're trying to do for Blacks. We're trying to make them. Now, my feeling is if a Black person wants to be white, fine, that's it. If a white person wants to be Black, fine. If that's what they want to do, fine. But it's not that. That's not the issue. The issue is one of coercion. Do you really want to force people to do these things? And basically with government power, the answer for me is no. It's individual choice, what you want to do, as long as you don't harm others. The old joke I used to make is you can do whatever you want as long as you don't make too much noise and scare the animals.
Yes, and I'm laughing because you're empirically correct, but you're also funny. Just like that guy, Nick Cannon. And again, you're an erudite man, so I don't need to cite the data for you. I'm doing it for my audience. Monogamy is positively related to economic growth and the rate of savings. Even when polygamous families are richer, monogamous families tend to be better off. Is monogamy Eurocentric? Well, yes, it is Eurocentric in the sense that the Roman Catholic Church made marriage a sacrament in Western society, and even the Greeks and the Romans practiced monogamy. But
Right.
monogamy has positive consequences. Nick Cannon, this is what he said. Nick Cannon apparently in 1 year impregnated several women, and Nick Cannon said, well, monogamy is a Eurocentric standard. Well, it could be Eurocentric, but it's also correlated with development. So if Nick Cannon wants to impregnate several women and is unable to appreciate the consequences of doing so, so what?
Yeah. Let me give you another way of looking at that, okay, about monogamy. And that is the role of polygamy in having unmarried men. That if you have polygamy, a few males in society, you can look at the animal kingdom where, say, an elephant seal will have a harem of 15, 20 possible men. But if you have a society where wealthy men monopolize the women, the correlate of that is there are a lot of men who will not get married. In my mind, this is a great recipe for trouble. Show me a society with lots of unmarried men, age, say, 16 to 30, hanging around, and I'll show you a troubled society. They are I've been told that this is one of the ways that Islamists recruit suicide bombers. They say, when you blow yourself up, you'll go to heaven. And when you get to heaven, you know what you're going to find? Endless
Bird.
numbers of women say yes. In fact, someone told me, I don't know if it's true or not, that the Israeli intelligence agencies that have debriefed failed suicide bombers, okay? These are people who went out to blow themselves up, but for whatever reason didn't consummate the act. They were showed pornography the night before. In fact, many of the 9/11 bombers indulged, in strip clubs and pornography the day before. And this was considered sort of like coming attractions. You know what's going to happen to you when you blow yourself up? Here's what's going to happen. Roll them, and they show you these pornographic films. That's what the life you're going to have. Now, if you have a sex-starved 18-year-old kid who's been fantasizing all of his life about having all these women and having all this sex, yeah, give me the suicide vest right now. I'm going to go out and do it. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 18-year-olds are stupid. They have dislocated brains. You know, you were 18 at one point. You know, they have their brains that go south for a couple of years. Big problem.
Uh, Robert, marriage civilizes men. What do married men do? They work harder to feed their
George Gilder's
families.
argument,
Yes,
the most powerful weapon over men. Men are irresponsible, crazy, and stupid, right? But
yes.
you know the weapon you can wield over
Pacify
men,
them, women, a family.
women. I'll tell you what it is. Let me tell you what it is. It's the couch.
All right, the coach of the
The couch.
football.
You come home, and she says, "Where's your paycheck?" And she says, "I spent it on booze." To the couch. Oh no, not the couch. Yes, the couch. Because one way of getting men's attention, scientifically proven case, okay? Now, you can plead with them. Well, you know what's going to happen is our family is going to sink into poverty. We're not going to be able to have a house, all that kind of right. Now, in the short run, what's the best way of getting males' attention? Let me give you a clue. It's an area south of the belt and north of his knees.
I get your point quite clearly. Yes, women
There's an old
will.
adage, by the
Yes.
way, which some of your women viewers will find very funny and perhaps offensive, that that women who believe that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach are aiming too high.
Yeah, they should aim lower. I get your point. You're a
You
naughty
may
old man. You're a naughty old man, Robert. Quite
Oh, come
naughty.
on now. I told this to them, they said, you know what? My first husband was like that, they tell me.
Yes, but I'm really enjoying this conversation. We're making light of complicated issues. And Robert, I'm always baffled. I read you and I read Paul Gottfried. And I ask, because I'm in my 20s, so I'm young and naive, so I keep
Yeah.
annoying Paul. And Paul keeps giving the same answer. I'm overestimating the abilities of some of these people, and I don't properly understand their long-term uh, objectives. People like you and Paul are not promoted by the conservative movement, and I understand why today.
Well, let me give you another aspect of that, okay? That the conservative movement, like all political movements these days, first of all, there are lots and lots of conservative groups out there. But one thing in common they have is an insatiable appetite for money. That's what the
Does
conservative movement is all
they're
about.
grifters?
And what happens is people like Paul and I, who are academics, we're not big donors. I belong to a couple groups in town here that are conservative, and it's all pay to play. You want to go to the dinners, you want to go to the lunch, you want to go to the meetings, pay up. Now, for example, every year, one of the organizations I'm a member of has a big banquet to honor somebody, some notable conservative. They have the banquet at a restaurant, and it's black tie. I fortunately own a tuxedo. And you know how much a ticket is for this dinner?
100.
$5,000.
Wow.
$5,000. That's
I
just
would.
for a ticket,
Yes.
and you get a meal. Now, even rich academics will not pay $5,000 to hear somebody give a third-rate speech and sit next to a person who is not terribly interesting. Academics ask for money, they don't give money. So when I go to these conservative organization events that require donations of a sizable order, there are very, very few academics. The people who go to these things are in the financial world. These are people who run hedge funds, they're people who run, investment organizations. They have this kind of money. They have $30,000 to wear a dress that says "Raise Tax the Rich." Uh, when you get into the world of higher levels of conservative organizations, it's expensive. Take my word for it. I get these invitations. A simple lunch, $2,500. Now, the unfortunate reality is that these people in the world of finance, people who run hedge funds, are very, very smart, but they know very little about politics and culture.
Robert, you're also missing another crucial point. So when Ayn Rand was popular, some of her donors were on the real libertarian and conservative right. But across several years, the big donors on the right, they have become progressively liberal. So for example, the Koch brothers, people demonize the Koch brothers, but the Koch brothers are basically nice old men. They're not going to fund someone like yourself or a radical libertarian.
I had an interesting run-in with the Koch brothers. That's for another time.
Yeah, but that's the issue. Many of the deep pocket men and women today in the conservative movement are not that conservative.
Right. I'll tell you part of the reason for that. This is Peter Brimelow's idea, not mine. It's the dinner party. Uh, I joke, my wife and I are most never invited to serious dinner parties. Why? We're not big benefactors. Moreover, we have, at least I have, she's less so than me, kind of unpopular views. So if we go to a fancy dinner party and somebody asks me my opinion on something, I'm likely, unless I'm willing to lie that particular day, to offer a fairly unpopular view. That's not good at a dinner party. It's disruptive. Hostesses don't want people causing trouble at dinner parties. They want nice, amiable conversation about, chit chat and things like that. So if you're kind of a hardcore conservative and outspoken and don't have a whole lot of money, you eat in restaurants, not at dinner parties. That's just the reality. And a lot of people will say, Peter Brimelow is very good on this point. He talks about Bill Buckley in this context. Simply want the good social life, and they will moderate their views to get invited to. Look at David Brooks.
Yes, David Brooks.
I loved his book about Bobos in Paradise, but he to put it bluntly, he drank the Kool-Aid. He got to the New York Times and said, you know what, if I espouse real conservative views here, I'll eat by myself out of a brown bag in the office. Nobody will invite me to lunch. And people are profoundly social. You know that.
Yes.
Nobody can live a non-social life. And so the need for social life takes over, and you moderate your views to be socially acceptable. It's as simple as that. And you give a couple $100,000 a year.
Yes, so for example, my own philosophy, Robert, is quite simple. I am a Christian libertarian who believes in free speech, and because I believe in free speech, I invite people like yourself. But what are my own views? No one should know.
Right.
And so far, Robert's just been paying off. Many of my guests are mainstream people, and they have assisted me in many areas. So far, it's paying off. Repeat what you just said.
Okay, a couple of years ago, I wrote an article for Chronicles when I was writing for Chronicles decades ago, talking about the title of the article was "Conservatives, the Queers of the '90s." Okay, the way conservatives are today is like homosexuals were, say, 30 years ago. You have to keep it very, very private. Okay, everybody kind of suspected. I mean, when I go someplace, people say, I kind of suspect he knows Charles Murray, but we can't prove it. And it's sort of like, The old, I grew up, I remember, I've always had homosexual friends as long as I can remember, because my closest friends are actually a gay couple who are very conservative, I should add. Nevertheless, I know that culture. And I know that for many, many decades. I know how careful they were that not to cross the line. If they wanted to be accepted, everybody kind of knew, but nobody knew for sure. And conservatives like myself, Paul, and others are kind of like that. We are the queers of the present era. Now, of course, you can be absolutely flaming, and wild. You can be, transgendered, whatever it is. I don't want to go through all the things
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
can.
I,
Nevertheless, and nobody really cares. Okay, but back in the 50s, you could be an absolute hardliner on conservative issues, and nobody cared. But God forbid if you were gay, okay, everybody cared. And now it's been reversed. You can go in and say, my name is Bob, and I'm really a woman, and I like little boys, and all these. Oh, how interesting. Okay, but on the other hand, I really do think that blacks have a high crime rate. Out of the dinner party he goes.
but Robert, do you know what's the flip side? I can write intelligently on race and interview people like you and not get canceled because of the color of my skin.
Yeah, you have diplomatic immunity.
Yes.
It's like we used to in New York City years ago. I don't know if they still have it. You used to see cars parked illegal all over the place. Fire hydrants on corners, no parking zones, and they all had one kind of characteristic. They all had DL on their license plates.
Yeah. So for example, I based on my survey of the data, humans are innately tribal. I'm not a nationalist, but as such, nationalism is normal. I don't
Yeah,
subscribe to white nationalism or even black nationalism. But if people express nationalistic identities, this is not a problem.
no, it's what got okay. It's what got us here. It's all very simple statistically. Okay, human beings, Homo sapiens, been around about 300,000 years, more or less. I'm not sure, but something like that. Now, most of the family lines that existed in the past never made it to the present, right? So your ancestors did something that got you here.
Of
I mean, we
course.
know that because you're here, right?
Yes.
And most of the people 200,000 years ago died out. So you're a survivor by definition, right?
Yes.
Now, the question is, what did your ancestors do that made them survivors where the guy next door's ancestry died out?
They were intelligent, Robert.
Well, they did a lot of other things too, my dear. Uh, intelligence was only, I have somehow this thing disappeared here.
You can continue, not a problem. You can continue.
Okay. Uh, I'm going to put on here the video portion of the thing. Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. They did other things too. I hate to announce this to you, but they probably killed a bunch of people too. And when times were tough, they probably practiced cannibalism. And they probably lied and cheated to survive. And there are all these stories of people trapped in the jungle or trapped on mountain passes. They do awful things to survive. Those that don't do awful things leave the gene pool.
Yes.
Your ancestors were tough critters. Take my word for it. If they weren't, you wouldn't have been here.
Yes. And
What happens is those traits, those are called atavistic traits. Atavistic traits are traits that are in your gene pool that occasionally, after being dormant for a while, will suddenly emerge.
yes.
And you may be in a situation, mild-mannered guy. Hey, I never harmed a flea. I'm a nice guy. Me, I'm Mr. Nice, right? And then somebody sticks a gun in your face, and what happens is those genes that are there, courtesy of your ancestors, rise to the occasion, and you take out your gun and you point at the guy's face and you say, "Ask yourself, is today your lucky day?"
But Robert, you are correct. I am mild-mannered, but I say to people all the time, I have a dominant personality. So, for example, even when I'm soliciting guests on the show, I encourage them to come on. And if they say no, I send an email. You're a great scholar. You should come on the show. I have a very dominant personality. And people often say, okay, you're so small in stature, but why are you so dominant? So you're right.
Ah, the human genome is filled with all kinds of survival genes.
Yes.
And what happens is under pressure, those come out. And that's why we have horrific things that go on in the world today.
Yeah.
Killing of children, genocide, all these things. These are not aberrations. These are in the gene pool. We have thousands of millions of genes. We don't even know what they are. But put in a situation, people do these things, horrible things. How can they do them?
Because of gene culture co-evolution. This is what people, this is the sophisticated term when people don't want to mention race. They say gene culture co-evolutions.
Right. What happens is that one of the worst things about political correctness is that it's contrary to our basic instincts. For example, let's imagine you had an ancestor about 150,000 years ago. Let's just call him Joe, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Joe is walking somewhere and he sees a whole bunch of people coming towards him who look very different than him. Now, what is Joe's survival instincts telling him?
Joe will either avoid them or kill them.
Well, if it's a bunch of people coming to him, and this is 150,000 years ago, unless he is extremely good warrior or somehow gotten possession of a machine gun, okay, his basic response was get away.
Exactly.
Right. Now, if he walks up to him and says, thank you for coming into my neighborhood, you bring vibrancy and diversity, and I'm sure I can learn a great deal of multiculturalism from you people. What happens to Joe?
He dies. Joe is annihilated. Right. Exactly. Yeah. No.
Didn't take you long to reach that conclusion.
But look, evolutionary psychology is simple when you get the essence. People in the evolutionary path, to survive, they have to be smart. What do we mean when we say smart? Well, it made perfect sense to be skeptical of strangers.
Right. There are lots of examples of that, by the way. One of the ways you keep your genes alive is you keep your wife from straying too far.
Yes, sir.
I mean, the last thing in the world you want to do to keep your gene pool going is to allow outsiders to have children with your wife, and then you spend all your time raising them.
Exactly. Now, this is the last point we're going to discuss, Robert. And because you're smart, it's obvious that during the duration of the conversation, I did not waste time mentioning the National Review.
I don't read it. I was sort of kicked out of them.
Yeah, I know.
Part of that. I mean, I never got a salary. John Derbyshire he and I got kicked out at the same time.
Yeah.
But he was really part of the National Review. I was a very, very peripheral person. John, by the way, we compete of how many places we've been kicked out of.
Yeah, so I'm not going to, I didn't mention the National Review. I am not going to dig up some of your old critics. Those people are a waste of time. I'm keeping the debate academic and serious because stupid people don't matter, Robert. They don't matter at all. So this is our last point. Academia. There's an article written by some person called J. Nathan Matthews and his co-writers, and it is titled Universities Say They Want More Diverse Faculty, so why is academia still so white? And
yeah, I've seen that article. I haven't read it.
Yeah, and he's arguing that minorities are likely to leave academia, and he also contends that their research topics are not funded. It's not a very interesting piece. But again, back to gene culture co-evolution. Openness and individualism are very strong variants in Western societies. And I say it all the time. There are many white men and women who are experts in African history, but less blacks who are experts in European history or even Chinese history. So obviously, because academia thrives on innovation, white scholars, they have a superior edge in the sense that they tend to be more individualistic and open to ideas. A white person will write on black racism and he will study black communities, whereas many high-profile black scholars are studying race and issues that I
Yeah,
find to
let me
be
give you I mean,
uninteresting.
I can talk on that subject
Yeah.
for days, having spent 40 years in the academy.
Robert, before you
Let me give
continue,
you one
Robert,
aspect.
quick point. There are some Africans who are just brilliant. I love their research. Africans are doing well, but continue.
Yeah, let me give you one small point. A German word called Sitzfleisch. Have you ever heard the word Sitzfleisch?
Maybe I've seen it, but I read out a German, so maybe I've
Sitzfleisch,
seen it.
okay,
Yeah.
it means literally means the flesh that you sit on. Okay, do you get the
Yeah.
anatomical reference?
Yeah, but I'm not. I can't pronounce Germanic words.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sitzfleisch is the ability to spend hour upon hour, in some cases thousands of hours, on a small little problem and solving that problem. Okay. There are people out there who have devoted their lives to relatively time-consuming efforts like studying ancient languages. Okay, yeah, there are people out there, for example, people who crack the code of the Rosetta Stone, or people who figured out DNA and stuff like that. It takes an enormous amount of energy and patience and concentration to work on a big problem. You don't sit down and you crack these problems overnight or weeks or days. It's sometimes a career. And there's no guarantee at the end of this that you're going to be successful. Now, that's a characteristic that's very, very rare in society. But people who are successful in the academy tend to have that trait. And if you like the good life, I mean, if somebody says to you, hey, why spend all your time trying to decipher, some ancient language of that nobody really cares about? Let's go out and have a couple of drinks and go down to the girly club. You say, no, I'm going to stay here and work on that language. It's a kind of monkish existence. You know what I'm talking about? Like people in a monastery.
Yes.
And not all cultures celebrate this kind of trait.
It's called time preference.
Right.
Yes.
And you cannot make people celebrate it who don't want to celebrate it.
Exactly my point. So again, it's a colossal waste of time. Why lament that blacks or Hispanics are underrepresented in the academia? If they were really passionate about doing well in academia, not even racism can stop them. Look at the story of William Scarborough.
Yeah.
That black academic, he encountered severe racism, but he still published great books.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, how about put it this way? What about practicing foul shots?
Practicing what?
Practicing foul shots.
What about them?
Well, there are some people who will stand. I mean, I remember reading stories about certain basketball players who would not leave the court until they had practiced 100 foul shots every single day.
Yeah, because they I guess they want to get better. They're reason for doing so.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is everybody has their own preference. Okay. That there are some people out there who will be obsessed with perfecting their basketball skills, others with learning some arcane foreign language, each to their own.
Yes, so and we're going to end the show on a good note. Do not force blacks to be like whites.
And do not force whites to be like blacks.
Exactly. But however, this is the caveat, Robert. If some people are poorer because of their culture, what should we do?
Well, everybody, I think, has certain minimum needs that have to be provided for. And this is charitable, but it doesn't necessarily mean that when they accept the benefits that we give, for example, people who are starving in Africa, okay, you don't go out there and say, look, I'm going to give you food, but I'm also going to give you a watch. Now, next time you come from food, I want you to be here at 10 o'clock, not 10:05. 10 o'clock. You understand that? If you don't show up, I'm not going to give you the food. Now, my feeling is that you cannot take people whose culture disdains punctuality and force them to be punctual for no reason other than you like people who are punctual.
Mm, exactly my point. So if you really want to help them, then you have to work with their culture. But Robert, this conversation is quite interesting. I enjoyed it. Did you?
Well, good.
Did
And
you
I hope,
enjoy? Did you enjoy the conversation,
yeah,
Robert?
I enjoy it. You can tell I like talking about controversial things in amusing ways. And I hope that the magazine take website Takeout will publish more of my stuff, as I mentioned to you in my email communication beforehand. I sent them stuff several months ago. I don't know whatever happened to it, but we'll see.
Yeah, so they will publish your stuff and bye, Robert.
Okay,
All right, then bye.
you take care. Okay,
You
bye.
too.
By the way, okay,
You can what you're going to say. You were saying by the
okay, you
way.
send me a copy of this.
Of
Okay,
course I will. Bye.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.